Well, thank you, everybody. Sorry I'm a little late, but I had trouble switching off the reapportionment and getting back on. But welcome to our meeting. It's Wednesday, January 19th. And we have Michelle Childs with us, and we're going to talk about S-188, and which is licensing small cannabis growers or small cannabis cultivation growers. So, Michelle, would you want to give us a little overview in regards to S-188?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. For the record, Michelle Childs, Office of Legislative Counsel. Is it all right if I pull up the bill as introduced to walk you through?
Sure. Yeah.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus, for the bill as introduced, I'm going to focus on the sections that that I wrote. And I think you know that Mike O'Grady handles more of the farming issues and land use and all of those things. And I know that you spoke with him last week when he was in there on another bill and talked about some changes you would like to see to Section 3. And so he drafted an amendment, and I'm going to walk through that amendment with you. So I'm just going to kind of skip over that section as the bill is introduced, and then we'll go through the amendment that Mike prepared. Is that agreeable? Does that work for you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Good to see you too.
Nice to see you as well. Okay, can everybody see the bill as introduced up on the screen?
Yeah. Yes.
So one of the issues, one of the larger issues, and
Michelle, would you mind just zooming in a little bit to help us? Thanks.
I always forget I have that. I can use that as well. Trust me. So one of the larger issues in this proposal is looking at what is required of cannabis cultivators with respect to enclosures or screening for the land that they're using to cultivate cannabis outdoors. And so under current law, you'll see this definition in Section 1 of an enclosed locked facility. So that is something that was essentially taken, I think, almost verbatim from what has been traditionally for dispensaries under regulation, Department of Public Safety. And so you'll see that that it is rather restrictive. So right now, what we have in current law for what the new cannabis cultivators would need to comply with is they would need to cultivate in an enclosed locked facility. So it would have to be a building room, greenhouse, or an outdoor fenced area. It'd have to be in all sides, and it would have to prevent cannabis from being easily viewed by the public. It would have to be equipped with locks and security devices and only accessible by certain persons. You'll see that that section is struck, and these other sections in the bill are going to look at bringing some parity between what is permitted for home cultivators and bringing and putting it and having the same standard for those people who are cultivating cannabis under a license with the state. I'm going to skip over sections 2 and 3 because those are the farm and land use, and I'm going to go down to section 4. So,
Mr. Chair, could I just make sure I'm clear on something? The striking out of the secured space, that's still that is not changing Homegrow, is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Actually, something that might be, let me take you down. It's a little out of order, but let me show you what Homegrow looks like. If you look at section 6 here, so you'll note that, remember, if sometimes if we're amending different cannabis statutes, if you see that it's Title 7, we're talking about commercial cannabis in Title 7. If you see Title 18, we're talking about the regulation of cannabis under the regulated drugs chapter and the health chapter. Okay, so just a little kind of cue in there. So you'll see section 6 is amending the current Homegrow statute. So right now, I think you're aware folks can grow at home, and they've been able to do that for a few years. And if you look at page 7, subsection B, you'll see what current law is with regard to what they're permitted or how they have to, what they have to do with regard to growing at home. So personal cultivation of cannabis can only occur on property that's in the lawful possession of the cultivator or with the written consent of the person who's in lawful possession. And right now it says it has to be in an enclosure. That you'll see that word on line 13, enclosure, is being struck in terms of area so that it would not have to be entirely enclosed. It has to be an area that's screened from public view. And you'll see the language and is secure, again, eliminating the current requirement around having, while this doesn't specifically say locks or whatever, it talks about that it has to be a secured enclosure. That's eliminated, and it would just have to be an area that's screened from public view, and access is limited to the cultivator and persons 21 years of age or older who have permission. And that currently, if you violate that, that's a civil offense. So that's Homegrow there. So there's a couple little small tweaks, but I'm sure that Bren can talk to you about why they feel as though it's important to tweak that. And then, so we'll go back up now to section 4, and we'll look at this new standard for cultivator licenses. And let's look first at subsection B, because we're talking about the enclosure. So right now you'll see that on line 12, as we talked about a couple moments ago, cultivation of cannabis can only occur in the enclosed locked facility. So using that definition that we just took a look at in section 1. And now what this bill does is it trues it up with what you have for personal cultivation. So it just have to be on property lawfully owned by the cultivator or with the written permission of the person in lawful possession of the property, and in an area that's screened from public view with limited access to folks who are 21 years of age or older who have permission from the cultivator. So it's basically making it them the same, whether you're a home cultivator or you are a cultivator who is licensed by the board. Any questions about that particular issue?
Is it just 2 plants that we're talking about? Is that a small cultivator? No.
No, the section we were talking about a moment ago, section 6, that's the home cultivator, and that's where you can have the 2 mature and then a few immature. This section 4 that we're talking about is the cultivator license. So these are folks who so that would include small cultivators or larger cultivators who would apply for a license to the Cannabis Control Board. And this would be changing the standard so that right now, any cultivator that's licensed by the board commercially would have to grow in an enclosed locked facility. And this is changing that to be the same as how home growers would do it in terms of the enclosure. Now, they would still have all the other things that they would have to comply with respect to the license, but this is just talking about the enclosed space.
So Michelle, this is a pretty big change then for the larger cultivators, it seems.
It is.
Okay.
Can I ask a question, Michelle?
Sure.
I'm reading on line 15, access is limited to the cultivator, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm trying to get an idea of what is to be understood by that phrase. I know we've taken out the enclosure and the lock reference, but what does exactly limited to mean?
It means the only people who could access the space, the cultivator, and people who are 21 years of age or older, who the cultivator has said, sure, you can have access to the cannabis within this space.
Okay, I guess to me that implies that there's some door or fence, or I don't know how you can limit it to somebody without putting a thing around them.
I think those are good questions. I can say, the definition comes, as we just saw, from what has been in for personal use for Homegrow for the last few years. I don't know how necessarily that has been operating, or whether I haven't heard that there have been issues or concerns, but I realize that using that in a commercial context with much larger grows may present different concerns. And I'm guessing that Bryn, this is something that was requested by the board. And so I imagine that Bryn, on behalf of the board, can address some of those concerns or talk to you about how they would envision this looking. And perhaps they are, or maybe have, even because I know they've been working on rules really diligently. They may be addressing and teasing that out and what that means a little more in their rulemaking.
Thanks, Michelle.
Sure.
So if you're a cultivator with a license and you have 18, 19-year-old child, son or daughter, they wouldn't be able to work in the cultivation part.
That is true, but that's true under the whole licensing structure, is that only people who are 21, at least 21 years of age, are allowed to be an employee of a licensee.
And nobody has questioned that about employment for teenagers or, children of the cultivator or of the owner?
I don't know, but again, I think Bryn, probably on behalf of the board, if she's heard any comments from, they're always receiving public comments and having their working group meetings. So she probably would be a better person to answer that question.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the other issues. There's a few other discrete issues here. Aside from the enclosure issue. If you look again, we're still back on section 4, subsection A, and subsection A details the types of things that a cultivator may do pursuant to their license. And you'll see the new language on lines 9 through 11 would be allowing them to purchase and sell cannabis seeds and immature plants to another licensed cultivator. And so that would be if, someone has a certain strain that they are developing and there's another cultivator that wants to start, growing and selling that particular type of strain, that they would be able to do that between cultivators. Changes in section 5 on the wholesaler license. And again, the subsection, this first section is just focusing on what you can do under a wholesaler license. And you'll see the new language on subdivision 3, lines 7 through 9. That would allow a wholesaler to purchase seeds or immature plants from a cultivator and to sell them to a licensed cultivator. So again, just trying to allow for activity between cultivators and wholesalers to be sharing seeds and clones.
Any questions? No, good.
Okay, so I am going to go to Michael O'Grady's amendment. Is that all right to move on to that, to the farming issue?
Sure.
Okay. So this would be replacing the current, I believe, section 3 in the bill. And he's made a few, it's similar to what was introduced, but there's been a few tweaks after consultation, I think, with the chair and a couple, maybe the chair and the vice chair, as well as consultation with the board. And so subsection A is saying that when a licensed small cultivator, so remember, we're talking about that 1,000 square feet or less, cultivates cannabis outdoors. So this is a difference between what was the bill is introduced, is it didn't designate specifically that it's only outdoor small cultivators. And so this one specifies that it's small cultivators who grow outdoors on a parcel of land that are subject to RAPs. The land used for the cultivation of cannabis, so just that portion where the cannabis is grown, and the farm buildings used to dry or process that cannabis, one is going to be regulated as farming and not under Act 250. Two, not be regulated by municipal bylaw as set forth in Title 24, meaning it's not going to be subject to the local zoning and things like that. And then three, be considered the production of an agricultural product, farm product, crop, or agricultural crop for purposes of use value. Then the second change is on section B, which is just a clarification that the cultivation of cannabis on land that's regulated as farming doesn't qualify the entire parcel where the cultivation occurs as farming. So if you've got, 6 acres and you have 1,000 square feet of that, it doesn't all of a sudden, because you have that 1,000 square feet where you're cultivating cannabis, it doesn't then make the whole 6 acres where you're growing other things considered farming, or I guess it would be farming, never mind. But it doesn't qualify the whole parcel.
Yeah, because they have, like, current use has a minimum amount of like 25 acres or something.
Yes, I believe you're right. Yep.
Any questions, Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Michelle, if a current situation involving a cultivator has to do with a greenhouse operation, and they decide to take the roof off and the sides down, would that automatically put them in the category of growing outdoors?
Well,
I don't think I can answer that. I think that'd probably be a question for Bren.
Okay,
Maybe some backup from O'Grady.
thank you.
if Brian, if there's no building there, you would be outdoors, right?
Well, that's why I asked. I would assume so, but I don't know.
You're taking the roof, and then what else are you taking off?
Well, if there's any sides to it.
Right.
I guess there have to be sides or the roof would collapse, but.
Right. I'm not sure whether or not the board either has or is planning to be defining, further defining what it constitutes as outdoor. I would imagine so, especially because there's going to be differences in terms of licensing and fees and things like that. So my expectation is that they're going to probably parse through the details of what constitutes outdoor versus indoor.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Michelle, do you have more to tell us?
I do not.
Oh, so are there any final questions for Michelle from committee members? I guess not. So we'll switch over to Bren. Morning, Bren.
Good morning, committee. It's very nice.
You got a brand new job. You aren't working for us anymore.
I know it's a little heartbreaking, actually. So good morning. It's very nice to be with you again. For the record, Bryn Hare, Executive Director of the Cannabis Control Board. Very glad that I get to be with you on a new topic besides animal cruelty. So I'm here to talk about S-188, and I have heard that there have been some questions that I can answer, and I'll try and remember them as I kind of go through my points about the bill. But if you'll humor me for a minute, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what the board has been up to over the last 6 months or so to give you a little context of where some of these ideas came from. So I was hired by the board in July, and since July, the board has held about 35 full board meetings and about 75 meetings of its advisory committee and associated subcommittees. And also several meetings that were exclusively to hear feedback from the public. But all of those meetings were held pursuant to open meeting law. So they were held in public. They all had a public comment period. So the board has been, that's all to say that the board has really taken extensive feedback from the public about cannabis regulations, and there's been extensive public feedback that has informed the board's thinking on its rulemaking. So in addition to holding all those meetings, the board has also developed and pre-filed all 5 of its administrative rules. So 2 of those rules have gone through the ICAR process and they've been filed with LCAR. 3 more are on track in the next couple of weeks to go to LCAR. So some of the questions I can answer with respect to the outdoor, for example, we are working on definitions for what an outdoor cultivator is and what an indoor cultivator is. But anyway, we've had a lot of input from people. We had a lot of feedback and development of those rules. So much of what we heard, so just a reminder about the underlying enabling legislation. One of the legislative requirements for the board was that it should be a priority to move the existing sort of thriving illicit market into the regulated space, and also to really encourage participation of small local farmers in the regulated cannabis market. So it's been a priority of the board to figure out ways to do that. And that was really the genesis of the idea behind S188, which is that one of the primary barriers that we are hearing from small cultivators is both Act 250 jurisdiction, whether or not cultivating cannabis on a small plot would trigger an Act 250 review, and also the issue of municipalities being required to cultivate cannabis in an area that's zoned for commercial use. Those were 2 of kind of the largest concerns that we heard from small cultivators. So that was the idea behind S188, was to ensure that for small outdoor cultivators, Act 250 jurisdiction wouldn't apply, and any zoning regulations, if they were growing in a municipality with zoning, would also they would not be required to cultivate in a commercially zoned area. So though that is the genesis of that idea, and then I can also talk about the fencing requirements too, but I want to pause here just in case there are any questions.
Yeah. Is there a small cultivator? How many plants or how big a plot can they grow on? Brent?
Yep. So small cultivator is defined in our enabling legislation, and it's a cultivator that grows, has up to 1,000 square feet of plant canopy. So that is, all of their growing has to take place on 1,000 square feet.
But that's pretty small then, isn't it?
Yep, it is pretty small. And I would just note that I don't know how much this committee has been looking at the reports that we've filed. Most of our legislative reports were directed to the government operations committees and the money committees. But we have proposed a tiering structure for our outdoor and indoor cultivators. And all of those tiers are relatively small if you're comparing them to other states. So our outdoor cultivation tiers go up to 37,500 square feet. That's the highest tier that would be available for an outdoor cultivator. And we have similarly relatively small indoor cultivation sizes. But yes, 1,000 square feet is the smallest tier.
And 37,000 is the largest?
That's the largest outdoor tier. Yep.
Yep.
And the board has talked about opening up the lower tiers initially and not opening up the higher tiers for licensing right away to encourage the participation of smaller producers.
Now, are there any limits on, has the board set limits on the number of licenses they will issue?
Nope. So would you like me to move on and talk about the other sections of the bill about the fencing requirements?
Sure. Are there any other questions on what Ben's already talked about? If not, Anthony?
Yeah, I don't know if this is, hi, Brent, how are you?
Hi, good. How are you?
I don't know if this is a question for you or Michael Grady, but and it's something I should know about current use program. We're talking about a fairly small piece of property that would come under farming and be able to be enrolled in the current use program, is my understanding. I mean, is there a limit? Is there a minimum that can qualify for the current use program? It seems like such a small amount of land to put into current. I'm not opposed to the idea, but it just seems like I always thought of current use as being at least 10 acres or something like that. I don't know whether I'm off base on that.
Yep, I think that if a farmer produces at least $2,000 of sales from their farm, then they can also qualify. But I know that Kerry Jaguar from the Agency of Agriculture is here too, and he might be able to deliver a more nuanced answer to that.
Yeah, some strawberry producers, they have small plots and they can be in current use.
Sure.
Yeah, I believe if it's
Did you
under
have
25 acres. Yeah. Sorry.
I think we'll move on to your Chris.
Well, just along these lines, is this language triggering an enabling of entering current use, or just, my understanding is it's just for people that are already enrolled, and we're making it really clear that this doesn't jeopardize your enrollment, it doesn't invoke other rules. We're considering the whole thing farming, but it wouldn't allow you to become a farm. Isn't that right?
Yep. So that's my understanding also, that for use value appraisal purposes and for Act 250 jurisdiction and for municipal zoning, these small outdoor cultivators have the same exemptions that would apply to a farm, for example.
See, you could have a 10-acre plot and only use 1 acre or a half an acre for strawberries. And that one little plot would be exempt, and you could put that into current use, if, that portion. But we can have, maybe Carrie can help us with that, or we'll have somebody in from current use to really clarify that for us. Okay, Brent, thanks.
Yep. So I'll just talk about a little bit about sections 1, 2, and 6. Actually, not 1, 2, and 6. It's 1. Yeah, it's 1, 2, and 6. So these are the sections that have to do with the enclosed locked facility requirement. So just again, with respect to our directive from the legislature and the policy goals of the legislature to ensure that as much of the illicit market is, we can capture as much of the illicit market into the regulated space as possible. And also that we really are, diversifying our marketplace and ensuring that we are prioritizing these small producers. Another kind of concern that came up repeatedly was if every outdoor cultivator is required to cultivate in an enclosed locked facility, that would mean that there would be kind of fences all over the place. And the concern there is not only an aesthetic one, that people driving along the highway would be staring at, or along the back roads would be looking at fencing everywhere they go, but also just the regulatory burden that would impose on folks that are operating a smaller operation. So the idea here was to provide kind of a no more restrictive language for our cultivators, or outdoor cultivators, than exists in the Homegrow statute. So the idea here is to provide that there is some screening from the public, but it not necessarily be an enclosure, which would require a fence and presumably a lock. So we did request some small tweaks to the Homegrow statute to clarify that that also does not require an enclosure with some security measure. And that was really based on, again, the public comment and the testimony that we heard from people who are current home growers are not abiding by those requirements. They're growing in their home garden. They're not necessarily growing behind a locked fence. So that was the proposal that we had to sort of reduce the barriers for folks who are operating on a smaller scale.
So no fencing, Bren?
Right, it would not require fencing. Instead, it would require that you, if you're cultivating outside, you create some sort of barrier or screen. That could be a natural screen with shrubbery or trees, or if you're growing on kind of a back plot, that would be sufficient as long as it was screened from public view and access to minors is limited.
Yeah, Chris?
Fred, are the permit holders that would be granted permission to be one of these small cultivators, where are we drawing the line in terms of public records? Because I'm sort of picturing the ability to, go get some record, effectively have a map of dozens of small plots of cannabis growing, and let's say a September sweep where people just get their crops stolen. And so how are we, help me understand how we're not setting ourselves up for that.
Right. So we did work with some consultants in our work with our advisory committee and in developing the rules. And our consultants were former regulators in Massachusetts. So we did have some context in talking to other states who've unrolled their adult use market. And they indicated that the thefts were, there may have been a few at the very outset, but they were not an ongoing problem. Once the regulated market was kind of standing up and functional, people were less inclined to go and steal a plant from a field. It may be that there were kind of some teenagers who did it at the outset who didn't really realize how much work it involved once you took that plant. But we did hear that it was really not an ongoing problem. But with respect to the public records, the board it's not a part of our rule, but we're developing kind of policy and guidance documents for our own operation. And that has been one of the considerations, is ensuring that although some information will be public about licensees, ensuring that there's not public information about exact locations.
And Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Brent, I'm still, I guess, having trouble understanding how you can limit access if it's not enclosed, or in other words, if it's 1,000 square feet and I'm at one border of that, I could sneak in, can't I? I mean, there's no way, I don't understand how you can limit access without a physical barrier.
Right. So part of so first of all, I would just remind the committee that the legislature directed the board to come up with pretty stringent regulatory requirements for all types of licensees, including cultivators. I think we've got about 7 pages of directives about what our regulations have to entail. So licensees are going to face a pretty substantial regulatory burden. And what we heard from potential participants in the market was really that this will be their business. This will be sort of where they're earning their money. It will be incumbent upon them to both protect their crop and ensure that their business is successful. So they sort of encouraged us to put the onus on them for how to limit access to their cultivation area. So that may be with fences. depending on where the plot is, or it may be with always having a person on the property, or it may be other means. We do have requirements in our regulations of security cameras. So there will be other methods of ensuring that these plots aren't being accessed by members of the public.
Okay, thank you.
A few years ago, Bren, I'll get you, Anthony. A few years ago, when we passed the hemp growing law, there was a hemp farmer up in my district that had maybe 4 acres of hemp. And the first year he put an 8-foot high fence around. And the first year he grew his hemp, it was in a very remote area and he had cameras and all that. But the first year he grew, he had a terrible time in the fall with young people trying to get into thinking that was marijuana and taking the plants. But the last few years, he hasn't had any problems at all. So I think you folks may have a few problems when you first start, but then it'll straighten out. Anthony.
Thanks. This might actually be kind of irrelevant, but just thinking about Senator Collimore's concerns about how you limit access, it makes me think about how you put up no trespassing signs or no hunting signs, those kinds of things. There's no guarantee that you're going to limit that from happening on your land. It's just, you're letting people know that they're not welcome there. And if they violate that, I guess you can bring action against them. But it just seems like we often will try to limit access to property without any guarantee that you're going to be able to keep it limited.
Yep, I think that the idea really was to balance the goals of ensuring that these kind of plots were protected and screened from the public view, and not imposing sort of like overly burdensome restrictions on people who are trying to cultivate outside.
Do you have more to move on to, Ben?
Oh, sure. So I think the last point Michelle covered quite nicely, of the addition of some language to the other license types to ensure that other types of cannabis licensees are able to sell seeds and clones to other licensees, just to ensure that there is access to regulated means of growing for the various licensees on the market. That's really all I had to say about that. But happy to answer any other questions that I can.
Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I did ask Michelle earlier, Brent, if someone has currently got a greenhouse, and because this could pass and they have obviously some advantages, if and when it does, would they be able to pull off the roof and in essence become an outdoor grower and thereby qualify?
Yeah, so we sort of are in the process of developing our indoor and outdoor cultivation definitions, but essentially they're going to turn on whether there's some type of unnatural lighting or like HVAC system that's being applied. And if there's no unnatural lighting, artificial lighting or HVAC that's being applied, then it's likely outdoor cultivation. Because it really is about the energy draw that distinguishes sort of the indoor and the outdoor. Outdoor cultivators typically can achieve only one harvest cycle per year, unless they're using some light deprivation techniques. But in order to achieve several harvests a year, a cultivator really needs to be using some type of artificial light and heating source.
Thank you.
Yeah. So how many, I don't know a whole lot about the cultivation and the board. How many members do you have on your board, Brent?
There are three board members.
Well, just 3 and you.
And yep, they've got me, and we also have a general counsel and a couple of other a couple of other positions that are helping us. And we just transferred the medical cannabis team from the Department of Public Safety to the Cannabis Control Board as well.
Yeah, and where do you operate out of?
We're over on in the city center in the old Green Mountain Care Board space next to DFR.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
Not as nice as the State House.
Yeah. Everything going quite well, is it?
Yep, it's been very busy. We've, been working really hard to achieve these legislative milestones that we've been set. So it's been quite busy.
Well, you've certainly had a lot of meetings, that's for sure. Any other questions for Bren? If not, thanks a lot, Bren, and we'll move on to Carrie.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Morning, Carrie.
Good morning, Senator Starr. How are you?
Good, good.
For the record, Carrie Jaguar, Director of the Public Health Ag Resource Management Division at the Agency of Agriculture. Good morning, Senators. Sorry I missed you last week when you were discussing microplastics.
Yeah, that's going to be an issue that I think we're going to need to deal with.
Agreed. Just for the committee's information, of those public meetings that Bryn had mentioned, the agency was heavily participated in that process, and it's nice to see the culmination of all those talks appearing in this sort of, it's almost a housekeeping bill for the control board. One of the topics I think that's worth mentioning that I see is that if somebody has a small ag operation and wants to start or be in this cannabis space, without that enabling legislation to call that ag, you would have to somehow delineate and separate your fertilizer, your pots, your potting soil, and the stuff for your tomatoes or other starts is non-taxable. The stuff for cannabis would be taxable. And it seemed like a mess, an untenable mess for folks to try and navigate a space where half of their input would be taxed and half wouldn't. And I think you're solving that issue for folks that are already in this space, in the nursery space. So I appreciate that. Mr. O'Grady's amendment does that nicely.
So, are you gonna be in on any of the testing, I think you were on the hemp issue, or is that going to be handled at our lab and the state lab in Randolph, or do you know anything about that, Karen?
Yep, those conversations are ongoing with the board. I'm trying to figure out the best way to support testing, whether that's partnering with a private lab or using the state lab to do that testing. There's a lot of intricacies involved with high THC cannabis and hemp regulation. It makes sense to have all of the cannabis regulated under one umbrella, but currently at the federal level, there's some roadblocks to doing that. And one of those roadblocks is if you're registered with the DEA to analyze hemp, you cannot also handle high THC cannabis. So we're navigating that road, and I'll have more information probably in the next 6 months for you.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if properties are getting, seems like they're getting smaller all the time, more owners. And say if you know, you had a neighbor that was growing cannabis under this new law, and you were kind of dissatisfied with that, what would happen if you grew hemp next door to the cannabis? Would it hurt your hemp, or would it hurt the cannabis?
Hmm.
With the pollen, you know,
Yeah.
and all that.
The large majority of the hemp growers in Vermont are growing for cannabinoid content. There's very few growing for seed or fiber. And the folks growing for flower for cannabinoid content should be fully compatible with high THC cannabis crop. If where folks are choosing to grow fiber or seed crop, the pollen will be an issue, and some sort of mitigation will need to occur between folks trying to farm different crops. There's only 2 places in the state right now that I'm aware of that are growing for cedar fiber. So it isn't an issue currently.
No.
And other states have managed this, where it's been managed in Colorado, Oregon, and Washington. So if we need to manage a hemp crop with a high THC cannabis crop, we'll be able to.
Yeah. So we do still have people growing hemp.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Not, you know, at the peak there were over 1,200 registrants. We're down to 400 or 500.
Yeah. Well, that's too bad. Well, if we had a market, I mean, I think we'd probably have more, but
Agree.
Senator Coleman?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't mean to sound like a broken record with these 2 issues, but will it fall on the Agency of Ag to, I don't want to say enforce, but at least check up on whether folks are indeed limiting access and whether they are legitimately an outdoor operation?
It will fall on inspectors, cannabis inspectors. The control board is looking to keep the entire program in-house.
Okay.
That will be a decision that's made at your level, both in the Senate and in the House. If that doesn't pan out, we fully are equipped to sort of assist the control board in enforcement of those laws. And Senator Culmore, yes, I was part of the conversation about restricting access. And when you're thinking about this crop, it really isn't valuable until the last sort of 3 weeks of its time in the field. And what our hemp farmers have taken to doing is they'll camp out in the field and protect their crop that way. It's the last right before harvest. On 1,000 square feet, it's not very hard, and limiting access is not all that difficult, because if you're going to hike in and steal a crop, you may be able to walk off with 1 plant, maybe 2. They're 6, 8, 10 feet tall and not very light. So if you're going to really try and raid that field, you do need some sort of vehicular access. And I think about the field right here behind my house. The only way to get in that field, you have to drive through my backyard, basically. And nobody would be able to drive up there without my noticing. My sugar house is down the road. That's on a small plot. We have gated access, and one little security camera at the sugar house. It lets us know if anybody tries to drive into that driveway, but I would call that limiting access. But I'm off in the hills, you know. If somebody tries to drive into my backfield, I know it. If somebody tries to go into my sugar house, I know it. Those I've essentially limited access to that one, just proximity to my house. The other is with a fence, a wooden fenced gate that has a padlock on it, and a camera that goes off on my phone if somebody tries to drive in. And I can be there in 5 minutes. So we've done it in other industries, whether that's hemp or sugaring or, you know.
Yeah, last
Other-
year. I
Well,
think
as usual, Carrie, you've provided much clarity to me on this. It must be pretty obvious. I don't have particular expertise in this growing industry, if you will. So I wasn't even thinking about, and I don't want to say this the wrong way, but the timeliness of the raid, if you will. If you go in too early, you basically have something that's not worth a lot. So
Correct.
you've actually given me a perfect answer to my question. I thank you.
You're welcome.
Chris,
Thank you. I just wanted to, and I don't want to interrupt the flow, but I've been curious about our seed regulation that we worked on with you a couple of years ago. And I wonder, if not today, if you would be able to give us just a quick update of, is it working, and any reason to think we've done a good job or need to tweak it or anything. It's related nearby to this topic. So it just jogged my memory.
Yep, very good. It is. And I'll have Stephanie come in with me, and we'll give you a breakdown of how that's working.
Yep. And Carrie, I should have asked Bren this question, I guess. Why did they set the outdoor grow or the larger grow limit at 37,000 square feet and not an acre, like 42 or 3,000 square feet? Do you know the thinking or the reasoning behind that?
I'm going to defer to Bryn.
Yeah, Bren, do you know why that particular footage came up and why it didn't go to the size of an acre of property?
So thank you for the question. We were trying to come in under an acre. This was another endeavor by the board to ensure that we were not triggering Act 250 jurisdiction with the cultivation of cannabis outside.
Yeah, well, you're under by, you could have got 40,000 square feet. But I was just wondering why, it wasn't a uniform size of.
Because the size is really for the cultivation area, and most cultivators are going to want buildings on site to dry and cure their products. We tried to give them room to have those buildings also.
They have to be within the under 1 acre plot?
Well, that was the concern, is that we needed to cut that whole area of operation needed to come in under an acre to be sure that we weren't going to be triggering Act 250. So the cultivation area, we had it a little bit smaller to give room for the associated farm buildings.
Yeah. Well, that's a good reason and a good answer. So are there any other questions for Bren or Carrie? If not, I guess we're all set. Is there anyone else that the committee would like to have in, or Bren or Carrie, do you know of anybody else we should have in to support any of the, or parts of the bill that we're interested in, because it sounds like and looks like we're fairly happy with what we've seen and heard. Or are there other changes that you would suggest?
So not from me, but I don't know if that question was for your witnesses or for your committee.
Yeah. Well, Chris?
Well, I'll just say, there's some intricacy here of the potential tax impact. And I'm assuming that this goes to finance where we can explore it a little more.
On the money side.
Yeah, which is important for us to know what we're talking about, and historically has been important for my cat is using the edge of my computer here. Will you stop it? Historically has been important for the politics of particular House Ways and Means has been sort of dogged about that. So anyway, just to say that's my expectation that we'd get fully up to speed on that slice of it in finance.
Yep. No, I think as far as the ag portions of it, we're all good to go. So thank you, Bren and Michelle and Carrie. I appreciate your time, and we'll be taking action on this.
All right, thank you.
Senator Starr, what I'll do is I'll take that new language from Mike, since you guys are okay with it. I'll put it into a committee amendment, an individual instance of amendment, just striking and substituting that new section for section 3. And then I'll send that to Linda as well as all the committee and Michael as well, because I think Michael said that y'all kind of take up all the various issues on Friday mornings, and that might be a time for you to vote.
Yeah, that would be good. I know we want to move this along through the process. So that would be good, Michelle.
Okay, I'll have it out to you this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you. Committee, we have Farm Bureau coming in at 10:15.
No, Bobby, there's a revised agenda. Right now, you have the members of the nutrition programs and the school lunch programs. Helen and Betsy are here.
Oh, are they here now?
Yes, they've come instead of Farm Bureau. We rescheduled Farm Bureau.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's good because.
And they're here till 10:45, and then at 11, Ellen Kaler comes in.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, could we take 5 minutes, maybe?
Yeah, why not?